Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast with my guest, Frank Meyer from the Street Walkin Cheetahs. If you like what you hear today, be sure to follow the show, like it, rate it, share it aggressively with all your friends, and be sure to follow on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok for regular updates on upcoming guests. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram at Chicopee. Check out their state-of-the-art dealership next to BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or go to metrojeep.com and drive home in your new Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram today.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
So there's this question that gets asked by well-meaning people every single day. And that question is, when's that solo record finally coming out? It's a question that gets thrown out there all the time. Many times, it's a question that pops up every 2 or 3 hours. The problem, of course, is that solo records, like any other time-consuming project, don't just fall right out of you. Sometimes there are other things going on in people's lives that prevent them from writing that book, or building that deck, or shoveling that driveway, or even releasing that solo album that everyone thinks that you've got nothing but time to complete. Sometimes other things just get in the way, such as living your life and fulfilling every other possible obligation first. Which brings me to today's guest, Frank Meyer. On March 11th, Frank Meyer will be releasing his very first solo album of his longer than 30-year-long career called Living Between the Lines, released by Josie Cotton's Kitten Robot Records. It is jammed with amazing songs like Baby Dynamite and Blue Radio. It's all fantastic, all of it. Now, before you ask what took him so long to make this record, you might want to consider this. Since 1997, Frank Meyer has released about 10 albums with his band, the Street Walkin Cheetahs, one of the hardest working bands in America. On top of that, Frank has played with Wayne Kramer with the MC5, Fear, James Williamson from the Stooges, and Sylvain Sylvain from the New York Dolls. He's also authored or co-authored a number of books about the Ramones, Van Halen, Fatherhood, and Dave Mustaine from Megadeth. He's been a session player, a songwriter, and a collaborator on a multiple number of projects all over the world. He's also been busy producing, directing, and editing award-winning documentary films, videos, and TV commercials. He's also been a content producer for Fender Instruments and for NBC. He's been a music journalist for the LA Weekly and several other publications. I could also make the case that he's been busy carrying his brother, award-winning actor Breckin Meyer, for most of his life, but I'll let him make that argument. And on top of all of that, the Street Walkin Cheetahs have just reissued a great compilation of incredible covers that they've released over the last 4 decades called Best of All the Covers and More from Heavy Medication Records. So why is it taking this long for Frank Meyer to finally release a solo album? Gee, I don't know. Maybe you should rewind and listen to everything I just told you a second time around. Or maybe you just keep listening to my conversation with Frank Meyer. It's a hell of a story on Baxie's Musical Podcast. Before we really get into this, I have to say, this doesn't really happen very often. I get contacted by the publicist for an interview, and then days later, I get contacted by someone who works for him, and then I get contacted directly from you, completely independent of the other two. I wish all interview bookings were this simple. So,
Well,
thank you.
I think the algorithm thing, like, because I did get an email from Ray or Heather or someone over there, like, hey, I'm doing this interview, and I literally must have somehow, said it or did something, because then like a day later, your show turned up in my feed, and I feel like the algorithms these days are getting out of control.
Yeah, but in this case, it worked. So I'm very, thank goodness. Mark Zuckerberg's got it working for at least the two of us.
For once, it's not for pure evil.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the new record, Living Between the Lines. I absolutely love it. It sounds great, but I got to ask you this: what is more exhausting, making the record itself, or answering all the questions from people who are asking you, "Hey, when are you going to finish that damn solo record?"
Right. Neither one of them. To be honest, the way that record was kind of made is I've got like a home studio, so I'm always recording material, and I've just got this, hard drive full of songs. And when I'm kind of in that writing process, I don't really think about, like, is this a Street Walkin Cheetahs song? Is this a Trading Aces song? Is this a solo album? I kind of just write the song, and whatever the idea is, I try to just kind of see that idea through so that it comes out to be as close as kind of what I heard in my head. And then I later figure out like, oh, this would be a good Cheetahs song, or this will be good, or maybe sometimes someone like James Williamson from the Stooges, or Thor, this heavy metal guy I work with, they'll call me up and be like, hey, I'm looking for to work on a song, and I might have something like, oh, I got something, let's rewrite this, or why don't you give your ideas to this and we'll turn this into something. So with Living Between the Lines, I just had, it was like the best of my material, but kind of trying to stay away from sounding like my other material.
But what's funny about it is I'm going through your website and all the biographical information I was able to find on about you and about the band and everything else. The big question I had is, how does a guy like this even start a solo record? I was like, how do you even find time to start it? I mean, I know you're always working on it, you're always doing stuff, but you're involved in so many other things that I don't know if you prioritize one over the other, or is it just like you got your hands simultaneously in a bunch of different pots?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of both. At the moment, I'm playing in six active projects. Fear, I play in the punk band Fear. I play in Leaving from Fear's country band Range War. I play in the Street Walkin Cheetahs. I play in a band in Europe called Trading Aces. I play with handsome Dick Manitoba of the Dictators. And then I got this solo record coming out, and I have a band assembled for that, and going to Europe and touring for that, and doing some shows out here in the States. It's really more just at this point, and it took me, my entire life to get my career to this point. But at this point, this is my job. Like, I play music for a living. I balance the schedule so that, and some of my bands are bands where I'm kind of leading the creative on it, and some of them are bands where I'm a sideman and I'm taking orders to, learn these songs, learn the set, and that's cool because like those are both really cool roles to have. And for me, it's like a different thing. You kind of just got to know your lane, and it's like when I'm out there as the front man, that's one level of energy and creativity and sort of leadership and stuff that I'm providing. But if I'm coming in as a guitar player, then there's usually someone else that's in that role,
Sure.
and my role is to kind of step back and let them shine and be a support player. So it's scheduling, really, to answer your question. I just schedule everything so that I'm constantly working, basically.
I'll ask you more about some of the other collaboration stuff that you've done, but what do you prefer? I mean, do you prefer to be more on the sidelines as a support player, or do you prefer to be more upfront and in charge of something?
I think I probably prefer when I'm writing the material or involved in writing the material. So therefore, I guess I prefer being kind of upfront of my own band because that's the role usually there. But on the other hand, I got to be honest, being in Fear, for instance, provides me with the biggest stage to play on, in the sense that Fear's a legacy,
Sure.
legacy punk band that gets big festivals and tours at the level that I don't get in either the Street Walkin Cheetahs or my solo career, really any of the other bands I play in. So, I certainly don't mind being a sideman in a band like that because, like, I love the material. Fear is the first punk band, certainly the first hardcore band that I ever even heard and got really into, and went out and bought their record after I saw them, or heard their music in the movie Repo Man and saw them in Decline of the Western Civilization. I'm a huge fan. I'm a fan. I'm a big movie buff, and Leaving as a big, deep acting career. So I'm kind of honored to be there. So, like, being a sideman in that and getting to play these huge shows is awesome. you know?
But when I'm hearing the songs that you recorded for this specific album, what I hear is you're a guy that not only has the chops to actually write great songs, but you're also not above challenging yourself along the way. I mean, Baby Dynamite, I think was a great single out of the gate, but then Blue Radio, you challenge yourself to write a song as if you were probably a slightly less rich Taylor Swift. and I got to give you credit for that because I mean it's not always easy to write in the form of somebody else, but you did it, and it's the final product was really good.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, and it's funny too because I'm not really like, my go-to music isn't necessarily like real slick, happy, upbeat pop music.
As opposed to like the dancing of rainbows and unicorns of Fear.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, a lot of the music you hear on the radio is a lot more slick and poppy than I'm doing. And for me, a lot of my material with like the Street Walkin Cheetahs, for instance, and Trading Aces, which is one of my other bands, is definitely on the more like if it was a movie, it'd be an action bloodbath movie. There's a lot of people getting killed. There's revolutions and rock and roll and bar fights and chaos and sort of criminal behavior and seediness and stuff. So that's kind of something, an area I'm pretty well familiar with. When I started thinking about this solo record and writing material for it, I kind of just started trying to challenge myself more. It was like, well, yeah, you've done that, you know what I mean? There's no reason for me to make a record that sounds like that anymore. I mean, not anymore, but like here, because I can do that with the Street Walkin Cheetahs and my other bands. So let's try to do stuff that's a little bit more soulful, a little bluesier. And I had learned like this. Basically, I played this gig where they asked us to learn a bunch of cover songs, and I was playing bass for it. And one of the songs was "Shake It Off" by Taylor Swift, and I really was not familiar with her material at all, besides just her being famous. But I didn't really know the songs very much. And I listened to it, and I was like, "Wow, what a cool little pop song this is!" I kind of liked it. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. And I listened to some of her other stuff and kind of started listening a little bit more to just that whole movement and of other artists and stuff, and kind of going like, well, as a songwriter, this is all pretty interesting stuff. There's a lot of stuff going on that is sort of not the areas that I traverse in, but interesting and certainly catchy. And I'm definitely a person that really appreciates hooks. So I think I kind of overtly try to write something in the Taylor Swift, Amy Winehouse kind of vibe, like a little retro-y, a little bit of that 50s girl band kind of vibe, like the Shangri-Las or something, the Ronettes, but also very bouncy and poppy and happy too, even though the lyrics are kind of like this, it's almost like leader of the pack, like tragedy and romance and stuff. But the song is very happy and upbeat and kind of has this peppiness to it that is not an area that I often walk around in my songwriting. I don't do a whole lot of happy songs, but there's a bunch of happy songs on this record. And just in general, I think the only song there's a song called "Partners in Crime." It's me and Eddie Spaghetti from the Super Suckers, and he's an old pal of mine, and we both kind of do a lot of like real raucous kind of outlaw rock and roll. And so in that song, we rob a bank and kill a bunch of people and go to Mexico and get in a fight with cops and all that stuff. So don't worry, folks. There's still plenty of violence and mayhem on
Oh,
this record. I just
thank
focused it to like one song, and the rest of it's a little bit more personal.
well, thank goodness, because
I know. I didn't want anyone to be like miffed that like they didn't get what they paid for in a Frank Meyer related project. But
yeah, one of the songs that I really liked and really appreciated was "Piece of Me," which you sang with Cherry Curry from the Runaways. And I know
yeah.
that she played a pretty big part in your career, especially with the Street Walkin Cheetahs, back in the '90s. Tell me a little bit about your history, with her.
I mean, mainly, I'm a huge Runaways fan. Joan Jett was real instrumental in kind of getting me to be a kid that was very passionate about music and rock and roll. She was sort of like my gateway. Van Halen was what made me want to pick up an instrument because I heard his guitar sound, Eddie Van Halen, kind of went like, oh, I got to figure that out. But Joan Jett and then the Runaways were big for me in terms of um, they weren't really straight up punk rock, but it was kind of like my intro to punk rock, Bad Reputation and that stuff. When I heard that stuff, I was like, whoa, I've never heard anything like this. This is fast and heavy and loud and crazy. And then and they also wrote you know they wrote a lot of poppy songs, a lot of anthems. Obviously, everyone knows Cherry Bomb, but by the time that we started the Street Walkin Cheetahs in 1995, we were doing a lot of basically the reason we were called the Street Walkin Cheetahs is that we were doing covers by like the Stooges and the Runaways and the MC5 and the Dead Boys, which at the time those bands were kind of obscure. Their catalogs hadn't been re-released yet. Digital music wasn't really around, so that stuff was kind of no one was really doing that. And we were slipping in our own originals while doing these sort of obscure covers. And probably Cherry Bomb would have been one of the more famous covers we were doing. And it was the first one that we learned at our first practice. So after we had a few gigs under our belt, Sandy West and Cherie were playing a club gig. And we just went because we're like total nerds. And so we had our Runaways records and literally saw the show and went up to Cherie and Sandy afterwards and was like, can we get your autograph? And I think Sandy might have kind of been talking to someone else, but we somehow got Cherie engaged for a minute, and we were just like, we're such huge fans, and we love you so much, and everything you've done, and all the movies you've been in, and Fox is so great, and oh my god, and we have a band too, and we played our first song with Cherry Bomb. She's like, hold it, boys, and we're like, and we're playing here at this club next week doing Cherry Bomb. So if you want to come, and we gave her a flyer, like such nerds, but she's such a cool lady that like instead of calling security on us, you know what I mean? She was like, "Hey, that sounds great. You kids seem nice. Maybe I'll stop by next week and jump up on Cherry Bomb." And we were like, "Wow, Cherie Curry of the legendary Runaways. That sounds incredible." And we kind of walked away going, "There's no way. I mean, there's no way that's like that would happen. Like, why would she do that?" And she did. She came the next week and she showed up early and hung out with us and then watched the whole set and then sang Cherry Bomb with us. There's footage of this in the Cherry Bomb video that we put out of the version we eventually recorded with her. But we have that first show on video. And and she kind of started going around town telling people we were this great band, and she was really like, you know, very enthusiastic about us. And then she started singing it a bunch with us, and then me and Dino from our band started playing in her band and filling in for guys, and eventually we started collaborating, and we did a version of Cherry Bomb, and she and I have done a lot of collaborations over the
Wow.
years. So she had a lot to do with, I think, the beginning of my career in terms of being both an influence, but also literally like helping my band become not an obscure band that no one cared about. And then as soon as we kind of got that attention and that stamp of approval, we started putting in more originals because within a few gigs, this guy, Greg Shaw, who was kind of a big deal indie rock guy at the time, he saw us play and signed us. And like we only might have played like three or four originals in that set, and the rest of it was like not only you know, it was a Sonic Reducer, and you know, probably I Want to Be Your Dog or Search and Destroy or something like that, you know, kind of obvious covers, and some of which Greg Shaw himself at some point in Bomber had released. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because he put out some Stooges stuff, and he comes up. I think he had a little drink, and he was like, "Man, these songs are great. These songs are great." And I'm kind of going like, "Yeah, I mean, of course they're great. They're punk rock classics. You know that. You've released a lot of these." And he's like, "Yeah, man, you got more songs like this." And I'm kind of like, "Sure." And he was like, "Well, let's make a record." And I was like, "Cool." And then he split, and I went backstage and told the guys, like, "Well, the good news is we just got signed." And they're like, "What? How's that possible? Like, we're half the set's covers." And I'm like, "But that's the problem. That's the rub, is that like now we got to write a bunch of songs, you know, that are at the level of Sonic Reducer and the Stooges and stuff." So that kind of in a weird way sort of gave us like a mission, you know what I mean? It became sort of the sound of the band. I mean, obviously it was a sound we were already doing that we were fans of, but then at that point we are like, well, hell, you know, we got to start kind of leaning in that direction.
That's funny that that Cherie played such an important role for you guys. I mean, I've never met her, had the chance to interview her, and we just couldn't work it out. But this is a true story. I was once called an asshole by Lita Ford live on the radio, and that's a good story. So
Excellent. You know, that's solid. That's solid. That puts you in the game for sure. So the song on the record we did, "Piece of Me," is one that I kind of had the initial idea and sent her like a demo of it, and she rewrote some of the lyrics and kind of brought in her point of view. But it's kind of like a Prince style
mhm.
ballad, you know, sort of in the vein of a Purple Rain or something like that. You know, it's definitely not a power ballad. I'd say it's more like a soul ballad, but it's got a lot of trippy guitar and it's very sort of psychedelic. And you know, when I was writing it, I was kind of writing it thinking about like social media, in the sense that, you know, it's for all of us, but especially for younger people, like so much of their identity on social media, it's like you're constantly kind of giving a piece of yourself to the world. Like, you know, and it's like at one point, you know, or at some point, it's like, well, what do you keep to yourself? Like, what are you not constantly letting the world in on? And so I'm kind of writing it from that point of view. But I didn't tell her that. I just gave her like the verse that I wrote and the chorus hook and an idea of the music. And then she came back and wrote her parts, which I kind of took to be, because you know, Cherie Curry's a legend. She's a lot more famous than I. Like, I don't write a lot of songs about like what's it like to be famous, you know. But like from her point of view, because she's, you know, she's the kind of person people come up to her and go like, "You changed my life."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like she gets a level of like reverence because she, you know, she helped start a whole generation of musicians like me. So I sort of took it the way she wrote it and put a spin on it was like fame and like this idea of like, well, I give so much to you, the fans, creatively, and you know, and on stage, and what do I keep to myself? So I thought that was a kind of an interesting. And again, we never discussed it. I never told her what I was writing about, and I didn't ask her what she wrote it about. It's just when I got back her lyrics, I was like, whoa, that's a cool, like different point of view of the same
Yeah.
concept, you know?
Simultaneously to all of this is a reissue of the Street Walkin Cheetahs, all the covers and more record from I think it was like
Yeah,
came out 3 years ago.
yeah,
And I was looking at it and listening to some of the tracks from the one that came out a while back, and you talk about being starting off as a covers band, and the tracks on this are absolutely fantastic. And you had a lot of help on a lot of these. I mean, Angelo Moore and Dirty Walt from Fishbone playing Know Your Product from the Saints, and Sonic Reducer and Jimmy Zero's playing with you, and Emily with Sylvain Sylvain. As I'm looking through this, I'm thinking, well, how is this a reissue of this one a little bit differently? And I know that there's some coordination between a number of record companies at the same time. How did that all materialize?
yeah. I mean, basically, that album, which originally came out on Rumbar Records as a double CD, was a collection of all the covers that we'd recorded over the course of, 25, 26 years. The band's officially been together now 30 years, which is completely insane. But the starting with our first demo we ever did, there were covers on there, and we always recorded covers, and we would put them on our records, and we'd do them as b-sides, and we were like whores for being on any kind of tribute album or any sort of, especially back in the 90s and 2000s. They used to do a lot of these like tribute albums. Sometimes you could get a budget out of labels to do that. Sometimes you would just record the track and hand it over to someone. And so over the years, we've done, I mean, I don't know how many tracks are on that record, but like 70 or something, some insane amount. And along the way, we also did a bunch of them with artists. So, like when we made the album Waiting for the Death of My Generation, we had a horn section on a few songs, including the Saints cover Know Your Product. And the horn section that day was Angela Moore, Dirty Walt, John Wall from Clawhammer, a couple other people. And like, we were Wayne Kramer's backing band for a while, so those recordings done with Wayne throughout the years, and some MC5 stuff was done. We were Sylvain's backing band for a while from the Dolls, and so we went on the radio with him and some other stuff, and studio and recorded stuff. So this collection was assembling all that, whether they had guests or not. We just took all the covers that we'd ever done up until that point. And that's what all the covers and more the double disc was. When last year we toured Europe for the first time in like 20 years. We used to go to Europe all the time, but we hadn't in quite some time. But I've been going over there with my band Trading Aces, and I go over there as a solo artist and was kind of rebuilding the brand, if you will. And so there started to be a demand for the Cheetahs to come over there. And we did, and we met all these cool indie labels, a few that I'd been working with, a few that I met along the way. They were all Cheetahs fans, and everyone seemed to love that covers record. That's like we kind of put that out as just almost like a stopgap between like original material, and it just got great reviews. People really love it. It's just a fun record. I think especially because there's such a wide swath of bands we cover: the Motley Crue, Flaming Groovies. I mean, just all sorts of different sounds and stuff. There's short songs. There's long songs. Fuck Christmas is like 35 seconds long, and then some of the jams with Wayne Kramer are like 12 minutes long. So it's just a fun record. And all those labels were interested in reissuing, or not reissuing it, but putting it out on vinyl, because it never came out on vinyl.
Mm.
And Rumbar just did a CD version of it. So the problem is that it would have to be like a 4 album set to cover all the material on that.
Right.
And as great as the band is, and as much as these people love us, you're not going to believe it, but no one was really looking to put out a 4 album volume. It'd be a box set at that point. You know
Sure.
what I mean? It'd be cool as hell. Don't get me wrong, if anyone wants to do it, I'm into it. But I understood why they were like, hey, maybe we could like get it down to 1 album. And I was very much like, cool, why don't what? I was talking to one label initially, and then well, they all know each other. 2 of them are Spanish, and 1 of them is from Poland. They all know each other, and they were all fans and kind of talking about it. And they came back with this idea of like, what if each territory each label kind of pitches in essentially, and we make it like a three label thing, but each version is different. So each version has slightly different artwork and different color and different colored vinyl and stuff. And we had recorded a Gigi Allen cover at that point that hadn't been released, a new one. And so we threw that on as kind of a extra. So if you get it, you're getting a song that's not on the original thing. So that's sort of why it's like a different version of the same album.
It's funny because you're hitting on a number of names of people who have been on this podcast. Lee Ving has been on. The guys from Fishbone have been on. Cheetah Chrome has been on. Handsome Dick has been on.
Awesome.
I mean, these aren't just great musicians. I mean, these are real colorful characters. I mean,
Oh
these
yeah.
are really unusual types of guys. I mean, there must be stories about these guys that must be legendary for you.
Yeah, I mean, the fun part about getting to sort of do what I've gotten to do is that I'm fans of all these guys going in, but then at some point I end up on the road with them or playing in their band or recording or just whatever our relationship becomes. And then I've got my own stories and experiences instead of just, the famous ones that we've all read and Please Kill Me or whatever rock book you read these things in, or YouTube videos about, the history of punk and this, that, and this. When you roll around with Handsome Dick Manitoba on tour for a few weeks, like, believe me, I've got my own stories. Um, you know, all these guys. I was in Wayne Kramer's band on and off for about 2 years. I was in Sylvain's band on and off for about 2 years. I've been in Fear for over a year now. Same thing with Range War. I played with Cheetah Chrome for many, many years. I played with Cherie Curry. I played with Dennis Tech. I played with James Williamson. Um, One of the more unusual folks I played with, in that it doesn't really fit into those artists that we're talking about
Sure.
now, is Bob Dorough of Schoolhouse Rock, the guy that wrote and sang most of the Schoolhouse Rock stuff, who also had a career as a jazz musician. He plays
Sure.
on Sketches of Spain by Miles Davis, and he has a bunch of sort of solo jazz and folk records. And in the 90s, when Rhino reissued all the Schoolhouse Rock stuff, they got him to assemble the old band with a few new players, and that's where I stepped in, and do a tour of doing the Schoolhouse Rock material. So I got to go on tour with Bob Dorough, and I got to be like Lolly Senior, Lolly, 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 get your adverbs here, and I got to sing lead on some songs. I was singing lead on Electricity, Electricity, and then I was playing in the band and singing backing vocals and doing voices, and we were basically up there doing the whole gamut of that material, and everyone was kind of switching what roles and voices and sometimes instruments that they were playing. We were all doing like lead parts and chorus stuff, and it was way cool.
One of the things that you've also done, which is also pretty fascinating, is because I was reading up on some of this and even listened to a couple of interviews that you had done, talking about some of the books that you either written or have co-written over the years. You've done a couple books about the Ramones, one with Monty Melnick, who had been the Ramones road manager from the beginning, from their entire career. I mean, this is the guy that has seen everything with the Ramones, but then you also follow that up with the Ramones, Phil Spector, and the End of the Century, which the stories of Phil and the Guns and the Ramones are pretty remarkable. I mean, as a fan of the Ramones, to be given the access to a guy like a Monty Melnick, or even the information and the stories about End of the Century, what is your perspective on their career now, knowing some more information that you might not have known otherwise?
I mean, the Ramones are like a really amazing and kind of complex band in a lot of ways, in the sense that, they didn't really get their due and their fame till like most of them had passed away.
Mm.
And at the time, they were this hugely influential band, but they never really sold a lot of records when they were like a functioning band. So at the time, even though they obviously all enjoyed playing music and stuff, but I think there was a lot more struggle for a band that we, now think of as being so vastly influential and such a kind of an important band. It wasn't until like you didn't start hearing Blitzkrieg Bop in like, TV commercials and cartoon movies and all that stuff until like they'd all kind of passed away for the most part. so which is sort of the sad part of the Ramones story. There was a lot of infighting in the band throughout the years, not just because they had such different personalities, and not just because like Dee Dee gets kicked out or leaves, depending on the way you look at it, and is replaced. Took them a few guys to replace Dee Dee until they got to CJ, and they had different drummers and stuff along the way. You know, there are, but more than that, around the time of the book that I wrote with them and Phil Spector, is that there was like an affair happening between Joey Ramone's girlfriend and Johnny Ramone, and Joey was sort of never forgave Johnny, who eventually married that girl,
Mm.
for that indiscretion. And so for a long time, the guys in the band didn't talk, and there was just a lot of like tension within that band, whose music in a lot of ways is so upbeat. The Ramones wrote so many, I mean, not that the lyrics were necessarily like happy songs, but in general I always think of the Ramones music as being generally kind of like fun and upbeat. It's like happy fun music. Again, lyrics are often very negative in those songs, but musically my reaction is always like, hey, it's the Ramones. You know what I mean? Hey, you know what I mean? This is great. And then there was just a lot of, I think, tension behind all that, which there always is with great artists. For me, when I sort of think of all that, again, it's like I got to have my own adventures within that world, because I went and lived with Monty for like 2 weeks while we wrote that book. The majority of it done after that. And I stayed in his apartment, and the room I stayed in was where he kept all of the Ramones memorabilia. So every night when I go to sleep, there was just boxes of stuff, and I'd be with my little light, like leafing through and looking at all this stuff and just being so like blown away by it. And because Monty had such great relationships with all of the key players, like I'd done a lot of music journalism at that point and interviewed a lot of famous people and stuff. And usually, unless you have a relationship with them, their guard's always up a little bit, because they're doing an interview and they're aware of that and stuff. And some interviewers are trying to get them to say a zinger or whatever, get some dirt, or have an agenda maybe. When you walk in with a guy like Monty, who everyone's known like their whole lives and know that everyone else is cool with him, everyone was just way cool and very open and very candid, and it probably candid in a way that I wouldn't have gotten if I was just like, hey, I'm writing a Ramones book. You know what I mean? Because the first thought to anyone but me would be like, you're writing a Ramones book? Who the hell are you? You weren't there for any of this. Why would I want to have some young kid who's a fan essentially tell me about the history of the Ramones? And to have that kind of like Monty giving me that like comfort level and that seal of approval, like, don't worry, he's with me. People just were like, oh, well, come on in. And then they just told their story free of any stress or worrying about what my agenda was or any of that stuff. So it was pretty cool.
So, how does the experience of writing about the Ramones differ from when you wrote about Van Halen? Was it the same or different, or a completely different kind of situation?
Well, it was different in the sense that with the Ramones book, I was really helping Monty tell his story. So a lot of it was interviews and then transcribing those interviews and kind of editing them down. But the idea, though, is that the overall point of view is Monty's, what he saw when he was on the road, and other people are kind of chiming in to support, or in some cases go, well, I remember it differently. And I didn't do a ton of each chapter. I would sort of set the stage with kind of where we're at in the band's career then, and then it would kind of be like an oral history with all these interviews. The Van Halen stuff I did, Niels Lozauer, who's a real famous rock and roll photographer and was their guy during the David Lee Roth era of 78 through 84, has since written many coffee table books that collect his artwork and have some sort of text element, either interviews with the artist, interviews with other artists about the artist, might be some bio material along the way, might be comments from Neil about what he remembers. He's done a few books now, but when I met him, he hadn't done one yet, and he wanted to do the classic Van Halen era. And his concept was he wanted to have, like David Lee Roth write the foreword. At the time, the brothers weren't speaking to anyone.
Right.
I think we got Michael Anthony, and I can't remember if we got Michael Anthony or not. There's always a lot of politics when you do books like this. Like, these guys aren't talking to this guy. But anyway, so the idea was that we were going to talk to all the artists that were either influenced by Van Halen or might have even been there. Because like there's pictures from like Day on the Green where they played with like Ted Nugent. So we had Ted Nugent talk to us about like that, or if Ozzy talking about Van Halen opening for him or whatever. So my job on that book was to interview all those people. So essentially, Neil put me in touch with most of them because he's got the access, and he would get me a phone or in some cases an email exchange or something for me to go round up all those quotes. And sometimes people would send me kind of stuff that needed some editing or was too long or whatever, and I'd kind of have to just get it all batted into shape. And then Neil had some stuff he wanted to say. So I again, my job on that one was more editor, to some extent an interviewer. But then I had a whole other sort of Van Halen thing with David Lee Roth where I interviewed Dave for this magazine called Pop Smear, and we really hit it off, and his manager liked me, and they suddenly kind of were giving me all this access. I think they liked the idea of kind of having a young cool guy in the press that was like pro Dave or whatever. And it was kind of at a time when his career, he hadn't rejoined Van Halen yet, and his career was at a bit of a lower point maybe. And so suddenly I'm like hanging out with David Lee Roth all the time. And at one point,
Which can be good and bad at the same time.
it was pretty great. I mean, I'm a huge fan, and this was around the time of he did an album called the DLR album, which is a really great album. And he had essentially gotten the band Atomic Punks, who were like a known Van Halen tribute band. They were his backing band at the time, and for the first time in years, he was kind of doing set mainly based on his classic Van Halen stuff. So, and I was getting to like go into the studio and watch them rehearse and all that stuff. And I'm like, I was loving it. You know what I mean? All of a
Yeah.
sudden, I'm like going over to Dave's house and getting tours of his memorabilia and costumes and just everything. It was crazy. And so I wrote a bunch of stuff, with and for and about Dave for that period. And then I pitched him on the idea of we should write a book together because we've got a good kind of rapport here. And I'd suggested we make it kind of like a rock and roll philosophy book and be like everything you want to know from David Lee Roth kind of thing. And so we were in the process of, we had written a treatment for that I have, and we're in the process of getting that deal together when he went to New York to take over for Howard Stern when Howard Stern went to Satellite. That didn't work out. He got let go from that. Stayed in New York. Actually, he went to New York to be an EMT, to take the summer off and to be an EMT. Then, so he's like, "Oh, we're gonna put it on hold for 3 months while I go to." Don't worry, Frank. And then that turned into him replacing David Lee Roth replacing Howard Stern on the radio for a while. That didn't go well. And then, like, within, a couple weeks or months or something of that, he got offered by Irving Azoff to rejoin Van Halen, and they started kind of quietly negotiating all that. And at that point, he let go his current management team, who were kind of like my way to Dave.
Sure.
And so essentially the book deal and everything else just kind of fell apart. And I've seen Dave a few times since then. He's always super cool, but our relationship kind of, ended at that point.
So there's no chance that that could ever get, revisited down the road?
I mean, I wouldn't say there's no chance. I mean, I would certainly be down for doing it. It would be fun as hell. Just haven't really been in touch with Dave, and I don't know. I've been on to other things
Yeah.
and doing my own thing. I don't really do it a lot of like writing books. I've directed 3 documentary films and written 8 books, and I probably don't see myself doing any of that ever again. But you never know. I mean, Dave, that would put it this way: if somehow Dave and I ran into each other, or there was some opportunity to put that back on, that is something, because I always thought it was a great idea, and would be fun to do, that I would totally do. Um, but outside of that, I don't really see doing that kind of nonfiction-y again.
You mentioned, some of your directing and producing work, the documentary films and all of that. How did you get started in all that?
I was always a film buff, and my brother and I went to like a real kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of a liberal arts sort of grade school and high school and stuff. So there was a lot of um, either young artists or children of artists and famous people and stuff. So we were just exposed to a lot of art. and creative people um, early on. So I think that kind of set us on our way. He became an actor, I became a musician, but he was dabbling in music and I was dabbling in film and writing and stuff. The way when I was in college and after college, the way that I was playing in bands and stuff, but the way that I was paying my rent was as a journalist. So I was, writing for a long time, and that journalism kind of took me into some of these book adventures and stuff. And because I wrote for Hollywood Reporter and Variety and LA Weekly, and I was writing for kind of pretty straight laced kind of entertainment stuff, movie reviews and celebrity pieces and blah blah blah. Um, that took me into a job at NBC, and at NBC, I was there for 11 years. And this is just was my day gig while I was doing the Street Walkin Cheetahs, while I was doing my other bands. I would take time off and go on the road and do whatever. But at some point, I had, I had a daughter and I was a single dad and I had to provide for her. And I didn't want to be some flaky dude that wasn't around, like, not, because I'm on a tour bus with a bunch of guys in Idaho or something playing music. And so I had, this career at NBC, and I came in there as a writer. Originally, that was sort of my way in, was I was writing for the digital side for all these TV shows, writing like web content. That led to becoming a digital producer, which because it was NBC, there was camera people and gear and everything I need. If I could pitch them on
Mhm.
doing something, then they'd be like, great, take out a crew. But at some point when we got into stuff like podcasting and I started coming up with ideas that I really wanted to do where it was harder to get them to like dedicate a full crew, I kind of was just like, well, can I get a camera and a lav mic? And I just started learning how to shoot and light and stuff. And I was really lucky because I was working at a place where like everyone around me was, there was directors and producers and editors. So it's like, when I started making my own content there, which was great because I was doing it on their dime,
Sure.
but being able to pitch ideas like, hey, what if me and the host of this TV show go and do a podcast where he reviews comic books or she reviews comic books, and they'd be like, sure. And then it was like, well, what kind of budget? Well, we have no budget for that, but you could do it. And so we'll allow you to go do it during your day. You can carve it into your day, and you can have this empty room, and here the host is into it. You can talk to her and schedule it. um, and you can go downstairs here where we've got a camera and a lighting kit and a mic, but we can't dedicate crew people for you because that costs money and we're not giving you a budget for this. So I just kind of would turn to whoever knew more than me and be like, how do I shoot? You know what I mean? And then I didn't have a guy to do post, so I had to learn how to edit and color correct and mix audio. And then that became sort of, eventually I got gigs at NBC doing a lot of field producing. And so I would then sometimes go out as a one-man band like that and do it all myself. But oftentimes, once I got good at doing this, then they would give me budgets for stuff. And then they would be like, okay, you can go out. We're going to send you out with like a host, Olivia Munn from Attack of the Show is going to ask the questions. You're going to do the producing. You've got a camera operator. You've got a audio guy with a boom and a lav. You've got a production assistant to sign the releases and stuff. And I was doing that for a long time. So by the time I left NBC, I kind of had learned to do everything in the world of TV and digital content. And I started taking that skill set and going to places like Fender Musical Instruments and Tonal, the digital weightlifting program. And I was at Access Live for a while, and basically was getting a lot of jobs where when they wanted to build out either digital content or digital tutorial content. I'm kind of the guy when you're like, we have a budget, we know what we want to do, but what does it look like and how much does it cost and how long would it take to shoot one and blah, blah, blah. I'm the guy you bring in to sort of like, well, let's figure all that out and we'll shoot some pilots. And then I can kind of tell you, well, this is what that pilot costs. And if you want to do it in house, you're going to need X amount of people on staff versus freelance people that you hire on a daily. You're going to need this, that, and then here's your, how much content you could do in X amount of time with X amount of space. And then I'll get it all up and running and do, if you hire me to direct it, then I'll direct all that. When I was at Fender, when I left Fender, I was told I had directed over 3,000 pieces of guitar tutorial content.
Really?
Me personally, yeah.
3,000. That's amazing.
3,000.
Wow.
No, it's not. And here's
Well,
why.
it well, it is because
Meaning what it was, here's, I mean, it is amazing, and thank you. But what I see when I hear that number is like, oh my God, that studio we were in that had no windows, that was basically a box. How long did they have me trapped in that place?
yeah.
Like now, that was my job then. Now my job is I get on a plane and I go in front of 80,000 people at a festival and play Let's Have a War with Fear. I gotta tell you, I like my current job a lot better.
So let me ask you this: now that you've got all of this stuff in your background and a resume that's like 35,000 pages long, two questions. One, when are you gonna get cracking on that second solo album? And then secondly, does anyone in your family ever say to your brother, "Why can't you be more like your brother Frank"?
Uh, um, no, they don't. He's far more successful than I, so no. Breckin, my brother Breckin, is a great actor, and he does a lot of work as a producer and a writer, and a lot of voice work on cartoons and stuff. He's Joseph on King of the Hill. He's been on Robot Chicken, Family. I mean, he's one of the main guys on Robot Chicken. He's been on Family Guy, and he's an actor from a lot of big '90s movies and stuff. He's still an actor in lots of movies, but the ones he really kind of made his mark on early in his career were a lot of like the classic
Yeah.
rom-coms and stuff from the '90s, Clueless and Go and Road Trip and Rat Race and stuff. So a lot of folks know him from that stuff. But he what he does get is that there's folks that are really into music and punk rock and maybe don't pay attention to mainstream movies, that sometimes will put together that he's related to me or hear him talking, and they'll be like, oh wait, you're Frank Meyer's brother. And whenever that happens, he always gives me a text on that, and I'm always, because he knows I'm very happy. But for the most part, it's the other way around. People will be like, "Oh my God, your brother's the guy. He's Garfield's dad in the Garfield movies," and I'm like, "He sure is. He sure
Well,
is."
I will say this, Frank. Your first solo album is better than his first solo album.
That's true, and he hasn't even made a solo album yet.
But
But
he's not coming close.
No, no, but it would be fun to put him on the next one. I don't know when I'm going to make the next record. This one just came out. I mean, like I said, with this one, a lot of the songs were songs I kind of had already written and just went, oh, this would be the good home for them. And then a few were written with this in mind once I kind of committed to doing it. Um, I certainly have a bunch more songs in this vein of a little bluesy, little soulful, little poppy that could work for a second record, but I'd also probably want to sit down and write some new stuff for it that's kind of at where I'm at now. A lot of the Living Between the Lines record, as I was writing it, there was a lot of really heavy stuff going on. I mean, some of it was written during COVID, so there was that stuff and a lot of isolation and stuff during that. But I also, my mom passed away within the last year and a half.
Mm.
My dad passed, or her husband, my stepdad, passed away right after she did, and I was involved with all of their affairs, sort of leading up to that, and during that, and after the aftermath of that. And so I was going through a lot of like really deep, heavy shit, and kind of going, as I'm thinking about, like, as a songwriter and if what my voice would be on a solo record, it was like, man, if you don't deal with some of this stuff, you're not really being honest with yourself, and you're not being honest with your audience. So I kind of decided to really make, like I said, with the exception of the song with Eddie Spaghetti where we murder everyone in sight, um, most of the rest of this record is much more personal and much more based on what I was going through at that time, or sort
Yeah.
of my life story. And I think that that level of being really brutally honest comes through on the record and helps it sound a little different and maybe, dare I say, a little bit more mature than some of my previous juvenile behavior.
Well, my condolences for the losses in your family. That's never
Thank you.
easy to deal with. But the end result is a really fantastic record, and
Thanks, man.
I congratulate you for it because it really is awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Frank, this has been a lot of fun. I wish you all the best of luck with not only this record but also with the Street Walkin Cheetahs and everything else you got going on.
Thanks, man. I'll be on the road throughout this whole year playing in the Cheetahs and Fear and Handsome Dick Manitoba and doing solo dates. So if you see any of those things, give me a shout. Come on to the show. come see the show, come say hi to you, to the audience. I'm out there, baby. I'm easy to find.
Frank, so thank you so much. Good to talk to you. Best of luck.
You got it, man. Thanks so much.
The new album from Frank Meyer's Living Between the Lines is coming out on March 11th, and all the covers, the new album from the Street Walkin Cheetahs, is out right now. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you can always email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks again to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support. But most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.